But I do wonder, in trying to force people to look at value, that's just not what humans care about. Like, we do care about capability almost more than value.
So you can get the biggest spear in the world and whatever else, and it's all sitting down there, you've got a pile of them. But none of those actually automatically translates to my family's fed, right?
Because AI amplifies, right? So the people that are really, really good, AI amplifies how good they are. So if you were terrible before, now that you've got AI to magnify that, you're just going to be worse.
Every single AI system out there has these trade-offs already built into them.
It's 20 pages. What CEO is going to read 20 pages?
Do we have leadership systems that are advancing at a similar sort of pace to what the AI is doing? Hello and welcome to the AI Values podcast. I am Edosa Odaro, and today I've got Tolu as my co-host.
Hello. It is an honor and a pleasure to get to co-host with you. You are one of the AI minds that I love in this space. So I'm very excited to pick your brains about what's happening in the world of AI. So one of the things that I've always found fascinating about what you're building is this concept of AI values, right? So not just value, but values. And what I wanted to ask you about is, when you look out at the current market, what we're currently seeing, what are the values that you're seeing, right, that people are valuing when it comes to AI? Which of those do you think are in the right place, and which of those do you think are in the wrong place?
It's a really good place to start, because I do think that when we talk about AI, most of us think straight away it's all about technology, and we think about what's the latest thing that's come out, what's the latest model that's come out of Anthropic or OpenAI. And most people think it's all about, what this fancy chatbot can now do, the capability around that. But actually, I think what most people more deeply are thinking about when they think about AI is actually relevance, is actually themselves, something a lot deeper. They're thinking about their future. What does it mean for jobs? What does it mean for, can I get a job if I just came out of university? What does it mean for, can I hold on to my job if I was in the early stages of my career? What does it mean for my relevance, even within a job? I'm in there, but am I as relevant as I used to be as a human almost? So I think that's really the underlying. If you take out, I've had a little play on my phone, I've sent a few emails with ChatGPT or whatever else. What's the underlying thing the residual thing that people are actually thinking about? I think it's actually that. And I think we fail, always, if you like, as an industry, to focus a lot more on that and less on the tech, thinking about the LLMs, the latest LLM kind of model, or thinking about, what kinds of agentic systems have come out and what kind of complex architectures are kind of out there. Are we still neural nets? Are we now thinking more world models can bring out for us and things like that? That isn't really what people are more deeply concerned about.
I have a question for you actually around that, because I think that we work in data and AI, right? So even like what you just mentioned, right? There's probably a very small subset of people that can even when you said about neuronet, for example, I didn't know what that was until you said it, right? So that's not even something that's in my consciousness. And what I wonder is, you've got this kind of sliding scale from kind of like AI experts, through to like data and AI professionals, through to knowledge workers as a whole, then all the way through to there are some people that still don't understand that AI exists. They're not even using it. And I think we focus so much because our world is at that top end, right? We are thinking about those problems. But actually, majority of people are probably way further down the scale. They're not seeing all the different things they don't understand all of that, and neither probably do they need to. So do you think it's different as you go down that scale what people are caring about? Because I think a big bulk of people are just in that group where all they've heard about is mass layoffs. They've still not really used AI that much. They're not that comfortable with it. And that's what's really important to them. I don't know how much they care about the nuances between Opus 4.7 versus 4.8.
You're absolutely right. And what's interesting, and I think you really hit it there, is that there is a sliding scale. Right? I think even we almost assume that people in tech know AI, right? Even people in data, right? And that's certainly the wrong assumption. I think maybe we're fooled in the fact that so many people say they know AI, and so many people are posting about AI this and AI that, and advisors in AI. I mean, every other person is an AI advisor and an AI transformation expert these days. So I suppose we get fooled into this idea that people do actually know. But you're absolutely right. And I think the vast majority of people, even within tech, are worried about very, very similar sorts of things. And most people that I encounter, talk to, even, I mean, I speak to a lot of people outside of the kind of data and AI space as well. People, for instance, in cybersecurity or in infrastructure and people like that, or in software engineering, as an example. And a lot of them have very similar uncertainties to people who, for instance, are completely outside of technology. People say in a legal space, or maybe you're in, I don't know, a lot of people talk about people in creative media, or, but the truth of the matter is a lot of those uncertainties, in some ways, even more so, people in tech do feel uncertain, and they worry about what tomorrow looks like. And one way I think about it is, if anyone watching has ever been in a situation where your company's thinking about restructuring or changing your org model, or changing how teams are put together, departments are put together, especially if you're in large organizations. As soon as you get wind of it, you think, okay, what does that all mean in terms of, am I still in this team? Does my manager still want me? Is my job going to change? Is the people I interact with, is that all going to be different now? Do I need to learn new things? Or do I even have a job? Am I part of the broader plans of what my manager wants, or what my organization wants, right? And in some ways, AI is not much different. It drives that level of uncertainty in people, where people aren't even sure anymore as to where humans fit in the whole grand scheme of things, and in terms of contribution within organizations. And what does the future actually hold for humans? Is your expertise still useful? Are your skills still welcome? Is that kind of human judgment still relevant? Or are agents going to be able to make that judgment on our behalf? And so those are the kinds of things. And the interesting thing is, it cuts across not just the different skills buckets in terms of whether you're in tech or not tech, and the likes, but even hierarchies as well. And there's people who are very, very senior who have anxieties around this sorts of thing as well. But maybe the even more interesting sort of thing to pull out as well is that we think about these anxieties, and it's easy to think about them from a human, you and I kind of standpoint. But actually what you find is those anxieties actually filter into organizations. And it's,
but they're made up of people. That's the thing. An
well,
organization is just people organized. It's humans.
exactly.
So if the humans are worried, the organization is going to be worried.
Exactly. But I think what is fascinating is that, is the anxiety side of it, right? It's kind of like, and how, for instance, of course, we've talked about the individuals, and you think, okay, when you come into an organization, what does that feel like? What I'm sensing and what I see, both in terms of my interactions, but also in my writings, in my research, and and such like, is that employees feel very much like what we just described. They're thinking about relevance, things like that. But then when you look at the role sort of differentiation, then you start to see things like maybe executives more concerned about accountability and things like that. Who's going to be accountable for either, especially when things go wrong, right? Where's accountability, sort of structure going to go? Boards might start to think, okay, what does it mean for risk? Are we going to have more risks coming into the organization? Are we going to have to think about risk differently? How does that all get sort of, come out the wash? But maybe in some ways, we think of organizations and that's all internal, and all these different parts of the organization have different anxieties. Let's put them in different anxiety buckets in some ways. But then there is who the organization deals with, like your customers. They have a slightly different sort of perspective in that they're thinking more perhaps about trusts. Can I still trust this organization? What are they doing with my data? Who's made that decision that I'm now getting around the other end? Am I really talking to a human, or am I talking to some bot?
Yeah. Do you know what I find so interesting, right, is that I think all the things that you've described are what happens when humans have to deal with change, right? So in the past, I worked at a big company. Every 2 to 3 years, you'd have a restructure, and everybody knows it's roughly coming. It's turmoil. It's all of those things. I feel like there's two sides to it. One of them is that the change is happening so fast, right? Like it's constantly changing in this world of AI. I think the other side of it is that the change is now impacting customers and suppliers. It's impacting companies across lots of different industries. The last thing that probably impacted everybody like this was COVID. Right? COVID was something that whatever company you were in, companies were getting shut down, people were going on furlough, people couldn't travel. Like, it impacted lots of industries at once. But COVID was almost like this really external threat. It's a health-related thing. It's not technology. But with AI, it's technology. It's available to everybody. And it's disrupting pretty much every industry in one way or another. So it's so rare that actually, because if you think about like the Industrial Revolution, there were, manufacturing was impacted in this, but AI is literally everything, everything. And we've never, I can't think of something like this, where everybody is having some kind of impact.
COVID is a really good one. And I think it's one that is not distant at all memory wise. I think a lot of people probably still remember COVID. I think sticking with the COVID analogy and bringing that into organizations, I think what's really interesting is, how we just talked about all the different parts having different anxieties. What's interesting is if you took a step back from that, it's something like you're getting the same thing, quote unquote, the same tech, the same AI, but actually the tensions that you're feeling are very different, right? And so that's an important thing for people to consider, because I think too many people just think of it like, oh yeah, here's a change and we just need to get people to adopt this change. But actually, because the tensions are so different, you then need to take a step back and say, okay, it's not just about, here you go, AI, and let's educate people. Let's do some AI literacy, and let's just get people to adopt this thing. And the more people that use it, the better. And you see what's interesting, you see a lot of the numbers. There's been lots of news, I think, recently about what's happening more broadly in the tech market, all the big valuations for OpenAI, for NVIDIA, and all these kinds of guys. And one of the things that a very good friend of mine, actually, who's been doing a lot of research around this, is that when you look at all the numbers that they're putting out to the investors, actually most of the numbers are very much like traditional tech, is all around adoption. How many people are adopting the thing? How many users do we now have? How many now, of course, with OpenAI, I think with ChatGPT now heading towards the billion, or I think it's probably already there in the last day or so. So that's where all the focus is, as opposed to, right, what are all these different segments of people? What kinds of tensions are people feeling? What are people feeling personally? What are people feeling within organizations? What different concerns are we actually getting? And so bringing that all up to the surface and trying to understand, how do we address and resolve these kinds of things? And I think that's what's very different with AI.
I think it raises a really interesting point, because if we're really honest, most organizations are terrible at change management, right? Like, if you do change management well, you should be understanding all the different perspectives. You should be
Mm,
bringing something together that addresses it. But actually, all that we're seeing is that like our bad habits are being multiplied by a bazillion because AI amplifies, right? So the people that are really, really good, AI amplifies how good they are. The people that are
mm,
really, really bad, and this is one of the things I think you mentioned earlier, like about relevance, because taste and experience are only going to get
mm,
more important in the age of AI because you need to be able to look at it and go, that's not quite true. That actually looks terrible. Shouldn't do that. So that taste and experience is so important. But actually, what's just happening is people are just being multiplied. So if you were terrible
mm,
before, now that you've got AI to magnify that, you're just going to be worse. You know, if you were really
mm,
good before, you were using tools really well, that's going to be amplified by 1,000. You know, so what we're seeing is the
mm.
organizations that are actually quite good are approaching AI in a really good way and actually being able to roll that out quite well. But a lot of the organizations where it was a big struggle just to get data and dashboards and any kind of technology, now they're just even in a worse place and their cultures are suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think is that amplification and the scaling that you mentioned there is so important. But I think one of the things that all of this, and I like the fact you talk about so many organizations, most organizations, let's say it as it is, most
Yeah.
organizations are poor at change management. And then you come and you bring in something as complex, even though it seems simple on the surface with ChatGPT and the things, in terms of implementing and embedding into organizations, it becomes a very complex sort of undertaking. But I think what you talk about there is important because when you hear the numbers where a lot of the media is talking about AI failure, right? I mean, it sounds like a strange thing to talk about, right? Because in one way, we're talking about all this billions and trillions, right? But in the same kind of sense, we're talking numbers like 85% of AI fails, or even I think the
Really?
MIT
Wow.
numbers is something like 95%. I mean, I don't know how much is left really of the successful, right?
But question though, isn't that the same as businesses that failed before anyway? Do you see what I mean? Like most businesses don't succeed. Do you know what I'm saying? Isn't it just the same ratios, but now it's more important? Because I bet there was that guy who deleted the whole code base with Claude, right?
Mm-hmm.
I bet that before AI, there were loads of people that deleted their whole code bases, but we didn't know about it because they
Yes.
weren't using AI, right?
Yes, I knew, but yes, you're right.
You,
It
yeah,
wasn't kind of out there. I knew about it because I know, for instance, people. This is funny. I don't want to get into too tech, but I think there's there used to be this thing where, well, it still is actually, where there's parts of the underlying infrastructure in tech where
Mm,
if you deleted this thing, the whole thing
the
came
whole
down.
thing.
Like,
Yeah, yeah,
whether that was, it could just be a tiny little file where if you deleted it, then your entire operating system just
mm,
failed,
mm,
and this
mm.
almost it's not recoverable really. I mean,
Yes,
things like
yes.
a Unix OS or a Microsoft operating system. But anyhow, let's not get technical. Let's come out of the tech and actually I think what's really interesting is when you look at all these failure numbers, and not even just the organization failing, I'm talking even the initiatives, the AI
Yeah,
use cases, the
yeah.
AI projects. And but you're right, the failure rates are probably, interchangeable between failures in terms of startups and organizations more broadly. But I think what's really interesting is when you think about what we've been talking about just now, where there's all these different perspectives, all these different parts of organization, all these different people who have a different kind of reflection on how AI is affecting them and what tension
Mm,
they're feeling, etc. If you apply that to failure, when I talk to
mm,
people, sometimes you've got the same thing that's just been implemented, the same AI solution, the same system, and then you get different perspectives as to whether it was actually successful
yeah.
or a failure, right?
Failure. Yeah,
so,
yeah,
and so
yeah.
and so this is really, really
Interesting.
interesting, right? Because even agreeing whether it's a failure or not is difficult. And so you wonder
Mm,
where the 85% or the 95% actually come from, right? And what is the real number? Is it that high? Is it much less? Is it difficult to determine? But also,
Yeah. Yeah.
what it does, if you take a step back from that, is it says, well, the real problem here isn't whether the technology, succeeds or fails. The real problem is that we have a significant alignment issue, right? And not tech at all, right? It's really about how do you align, how do you bring all these different perspectives together,
Yeah.
either to decide, okay, this is actually something of value to us to do, or actually this has gone well, or this hasn't. And I think that's a big thing that I think we very, very rarely focus on.
I couldn't agree more, and I feel like that's just such a human problem, right? And it's like all that we've done is given ourselves a more powerful tool to do it with, right? So before we had these same conversations about data, right? We had these same conversations about some elements of technology, but now it's like we've gone from like a handgun to a bazooka. Do you know what I mean? Now we're really like struggling to manage this thing because the tools are just so much more powerful. But actually, at the core of it, that's the same problem that actually I've been working on solving for the probably last 15 years, right? So came from a commercial degree. I loved data and became a data person, and bridging that gap between, data and the business, right? And can we agree what success is? Can we agree what failure is? Can we set the right thing, the right direction? That's been the same problem that people have been solving for longer than I've been alive. But now it seems so widespread because now the teams that were never even thinking about data before, they're not only thinking about data, but they're thinking about AI, right? They're thinking about AI agents. So it's just like such a more powerful weapon, but we're still looking at the same problem that we've always had.
Yeah, what makes it even more surprising then is the fact that when you see a lot of the kind of reports and a lot of the kind of rhetoric that comes out in terms of these failures, a lot of the focus is either if they look deep into, say, Gen AI and things like that, people would say things like it's hallucinations, the models just need to get better, the agent sort of tech needs to improve, the agent to agent communication, all that kind of interfacing, how they all interact and things like that. That's where a lot of people focus. They focus, or sometimes people focus on things like maybe there's not enough education skills. I would talk to already earlier about literacy. Of course, our data foundations, data quality, foundations are still not complete. And but really, what I'm actually finding is that it's a lot of organizations actually inherently have, I would say, capable people. I wouldn't say necessarily tech, not necessarily experts in AI, but capable people, capable tech, especially given the cloud and the fact that lots of these things are now easily kind of accessible. And even to a certain degree, I mean, there's no such thing as perfect, right? But there's still some good data out there. And it's hard to say the backdrop of everyone talking about data quality, right? But still, value is hard. It just doesn't materialize. And that's a worry, right? But my thing is that I think we need to focus a lot more on what happens behind the scenes. When you think more about how things are fragmented anyway within the organization, information is fragmented, decision making is inherently disconnected, right? Teams are still as silos as they've always been, much as we talk about now in the AI age and all that kind of stuff, right? And so with the amplification of AI and what that's bringing, what you're finding is that we're losing even more so the coherence within organizations, actually amplifying that, making that even more difficult to hold the organization kind of together. And I think that's a huge thing.
I guess I have a question for you. Do you think we're trying to do something that is almost against our nature in a way? Because you said we're not focusing on value, right? For me, I agree with you, and I agree that value is important. But when I think about humans, value is such an abstract concept for us, right? Actually, in the past, we were really more about capability. Like, can you kill that animal, right? The value of you killing that animal is that we get to eat. But
Right,
actually,
right, right,
how many
right.
animals can you
Okay.
kill? How many things can you protect us from, right?
Right, right.
Capability has actually been what we've really focused on, right?
Mm,
What we
mm,
don't always see is that that person is more capable because they're skillful and they know how to do
hmm
things, not just because they're big and strong, but actually there's a little something more to it. But I do
mm,
wonder, in trying to force people to look at value, do we
mm.
fail at it because that's just not what humans care about? Like, we do care about capability almost more than value. And is that not what we're seeing, or what do you think about that?
I love the fact that you brought that up because I want to say it's probably one of the biggest misconceptions about AI, not about our nature, but about AI.
Mm,
And I think it's true that a lot of people actually assume that more capability would
yes,
automatically mean more value, right?
more value.
And
Yeah, yeah,
right,
yeah.
but unfortunately, I have to break this out to everyone there. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it absolutely does not. And
Doesn't.
and
No.
and you know, I mean, when you think about it, it's easy to see it wouldn't, right? But it's almost like what you say in terms of human nature. When we sit back and think about it logically, it's easier to see that absolutely, just having more
Mm,
capabilities is
mm,
not going to lead to that value.
no.
But the reason is this: capability is all about creating potential, right? I have the capability, I
Mm,
have the tools. If you think about it
mm,
in the Stone Ages or wherever ages, your capability will be how many spears you've got, how many daggers, or how
yeah.
many whatever else you got. But the thing that's actually going to give you the value is that you
It's how
land
you
that
use
thing
it.
into
Yeah.
that animal, or
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
or you're
Yeah.
able to get some crops, or you're able to get some seeds or whatever, and you can bring it home. You can
Yeah.
bring it home, and it
Yeah.
actually feeds your
Feeds your
family.
family. Yeah.
That's the difference. A
Mm,
spear is
mm,
that capability. You can get the biggest spear in the world and whatever else, and it's all sitting down there. You've got a pile of them, but none of those actually automatically translates
treats into
to
value.
my family's fed, right? And I think that's the thing that a lot of people, maybe unknowingly, like you say, and I hadn't thought about it in the way you actually laid it out, in that because we're wired in capability,
Mm,
actually both individually and what we're bringing into organizations, that's where all the focus is. We're counting those things, we're counting the spares, we're counting the activities, but actually forgetting that none of that actually
it
means
translates.
almost
Doesn't
anything.
translate.
Right.
No, but I guess how else
Right.
would you
Mm,
could you pick people to hire
mm,
based on capability, right? Like, okay,
mm,
I know Adosa has done X, Y, Z, so
mm,
that is what I'm judging if he can do that in my environment, right? Like, that's how we judge
mm,
people, is on potential,
mm,
capability. What have you proven from the past? And I do wonder if actually what we are trying to get to is where the capability negates our need for expertise and taste, right? Because
mm,
AGI is all about it being able to train itself, it being able to know what's
mm,
right and what's good by itself, right, without needing a
mm.
human. And that's really what we're all racing towards, right? Is how do we get to an
Yeah.
AI that's not hallucinating, getting better
Mm,
all the time, can have better judgment than a human, right? That's
mm,
really what we're trying to get to, because that
mm.
capability now is not just a spear, but it's a spear that gets up, goes out, hunts, kills the thing, and brings it back for you. That's a different type of tool.
Yeah, I think in some ways, I think that's utopia in some ways, right? I think,
Yeah, yeah.
but just to be clear to ourselves and to everyone watching, is that value only exists when outcomes actually improve, right? So I've
Mm,
gone from being hungry to being full,
mm,
or I've gone from that level of profitability to another level of profitability, or I've gone from it took me an hour to takes me a few minutes, right?
mm.
Where there's an improvement, an actual improvement.
Improvement.
And going back to the question, I mean, there's two things you raised there that are really important, and I think one of them around how do we assess people.
Mm,
It's true that in some ways, I know people that argue whether this is right or wrong. I mean, I know a lot of people argue it's wrong, by the way, that we judge a lot of how good we are in terms of capability, the things we know, whereas that, in some ways, if you look at it from an AI standpoint, is very similar. That capability does not automatically translate to value, right? What is the way that some people are evaluated, some people are assessed on the basis of, okay, you've got this capability, but what have you achieved with it? What have you done in the past? What outcomes have you, and those outcomes then are the value, right? And more and more so, and especially around sort of leadership positions, for instance, within AI and data and the likes of, which is much closer to my kind of world, people are now starting to be looked at and either assessed, in terms of getting a job, in terms of what have you achieved, i.e. outcomes in the past. But even where they're not, where we're having a lot of friction, a lot of unfortunate sort of situations, is that, the assessment to get into the job is capability, right?
Yeah.
But then your assessment as to whether you've done a good job is then outcome.
Is value. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then when you're looking at that, a lot of people then are saying, well, actually, you hired me on the basis of capability. Not only what capability I had, but you also wanted me to build capability, build a new data platform, do stuff around my data quality, and install lots of AI agents and whatever else is, right? But
you didn't
none
say
of
I'd be
those
measured
things,
on what people do with it.
right? Exactly. You didn't say I would measured on what outcomes, how profitable we are, how creative we are, or how many more customers we now have, or how trusted we now. You didn't say any of that, right? And I think that's a big thing, a big shift that we need to be thinking about. But to your second point I think is very important, which is the whole piece around AGI, right? Where's that leading? Now, I think that's a really important point, because I think it sort of starts to talk about a model of maybe where humans can get to in terms of our evolution. I know we're talking big things here, right? But really think about it, right? I almost feel that, a lot of what we do, and this is some of the good things I like about what big tech actually talk about with AI. I don't like everything. I do like some of the things, right? It's things like, how about we stop doing the kind of mundane task and, automate that away, and then humans go up to that next level. But unfortunately, I think that we still talk about this in a very kind of basic kind of way. In terms of, I think what's happened over the years is that a lot of what humans have been doing, a lot of we have been doing, is almost machine-like tasks. Take this here, repeat, copy, paste, write this, rewrite it, resolve that problem that's already been solved, and so on, right? And really, these kinds of things that really should be automated away, right? And where human, sort of capability, almost human knowledge should go, is around judgment. It's around things like, how do we then assess that this AGI is going to be doing the right thing for us, right? How do we assess the outcome? How do we judge whether it's right or wrong? How do we look at our values and say, that's closer to where I think we need to be getting to, that all of these things do all of the stuff that we have been doing. We've been like an extension of a computer system in some ways, because wherever this computer doesn't talk to another one, we'll copy and paste it from folder A to folder B and wherever else, right?
Yeah.
So now we're getting these agents to do all that stuff. We're feeling like aggrieved that it's taking my job. But actually, in some ways, you can argue that should always have been a computer's job. Why should it be us having to copy things from place to place and tell a computer what another computer has said? Why don't we just talk to each other, right?
Do you know where I'm really torn on this, right? Is that obviously I love automation, I love technology, I'm all for it. I think where I get really torn is that what I've noticed about a lot of people is that we are lazy, right? We don't critically think. How often do we just take what we're given? And this is what separates, average employees from good, great, whatever employees, is critical thinking, agency, right? The ability to take ownership and go do something. And my thing is that I learned a lot in my early career by doing some of those mundane, copy this from here, paste it to there. Actually, I pasted it in the wrong cell and that's not quite right. And this is the further down impact. My question is, how can we have judgment if we don't know how things work? How can we have judgment if we don't know that actually I did my 10 slides and I went to see my CEO and he blasted me for 10 slides and said, give me 2 slides? Until you've done that, how do you know what good judgment or bad judgment is, right?
Yeah.
So by getting rid of all the mundane, I'm almost a little bit like, but then how are we going to know that we're good? How are we going to know what's good and what's not good if I've not tried it and I've not failed? You know? And that's the bit that I get really torn on, because yes, we should automate as much of that mundane stuff that we shouldn't be doing. But also for me, that stuff was actually kind of valuable. You know, that's where I learned to be good at my job, because I was trying stuff out, I was failing, I was getting shouted at, whatever it was. And then I learned, no, okay, you see that thing, 3 bullet points for the CEO. Don't give him more than 1 slide. You know, like, because when you look at some of the AI outputs, you say, give me a quick slide deck. It's 20 pages. What CEO is going to read 20 pages? They're just not.
Yeah.
That's my question. How do we not lose that ability to critical think when we're losing the stuff that gives us that?
You're right. That's a much deeper question. And I think we do need to delve into that. But let's touch on it here. We might need to have yet another conversation. But let's touch on it, because I think it's an important one. Now, there are a number of layers to it, right? The first layer is education. How do we learn without doing this stuff in the way that you described? But the second one is the outcome in itself. Is it 100 slides? Is it 2? Is it 3 bullet points? So let's just take the education piece. And I think it needs its own kind of unpacking, but we'll touch it. The thing about it is that at the moment, we learn, and it's a whole thing about whether education was fit for purpose even before AI. Right?
Exactly.
Right. We learn the way we learn and what we learn on the basis of so much historical precedence around. It's just the way things have always been done. But when we think about a future world, the big question, and the question I think we need to ask more and more so now, and this is why I think we need a broader chat about it, is if we apply the same idea of not just capability but value to education, then we've got to think about, all right, we've got to think about what is the purpose of what we're learning, right? You know, because we live in a different world now where the outcomes, the thing we are as humans now accountable, responsible, what's it's for, isn't those PowerPoints anymore, right? It's something at a higher level. So the shape of that education in itself needs changing, right? And then the other question within that part of education is then how do you shape that? And that's where you have huge opportunities with the AI, because you can go from generic education where everyone learns the same thing in the same way to personalized education where everyone learns exactly what they need in the way they understand and the way they best receive it, etc. Right? So that's the one part. The other part around three bullet points to 300 slides is a question as to what's actually the purpose of that slide deck in the first place, right? And if you think about the purpose, and that purpose is a kind of decision making, then the question is what inputs does that decision making actually require, and how should that then be structured? So even the question as to whether it's 3 to 300 then potentially is up for review. And then, you know, when you start to review that, the question is where those inputs even go.
Yeah, because I guess in an AGI world, it's just AI talking to AI, right? So actually, am I going to be presenting to my CEO? Interesting. So I think that's the bit that we struggle with, because it might not even be the workplace like I know it. You know, that only works for the workplace that I grew up in. That interesting.
But also, I think it leads us to something which I think is quite important as well, which is really, because as we're talking about this now, and we've only talked about it for minutes, we can't unpack it all in one conversation. However, you already see multiple possibilities in terms of outcomes and what things look like, both in terms of future of work and just how we put things together. And this actually then starts to point out, almost going back towards where we were starting, which is around this idea that there's so many different outcomes, and the big question is, who decides, right?
Who decides?
Who decides? Who decides which of these possibilities actually make sense, how it makes sense, why it makes sense, etc. And that's the area now where there's got to be a lot more focus. And part of the reason for that is that, talking about value here, but most people in their minds are thinking value, oh yeah, ROI, right? Return on investment of some kind, right? I put in X number of dollars and I get X amount back, whether that's in time, things are quicker, or in terms of more customers, people are buying more, right? So that's the kind of almost binary way people think about ROI. But actually, the underlying thing going on is that you've got all these different possibilities, right? And those possibilities, in effect, are, in the simplest way to think about it, is that they present trade-offs, right?
Trade-offs.
So you might say something like, okay, I get it, we can go faster. But maybe you go faster at the expense of, say, visibility. Or let's say you go more efficient at the expense of, say, your resilience as an organization, or even in terms of your process. Or it could be that you automate more, but you lose judgment. You lose the ability to decide whether that thing should go through or not. Or you're innovating more. You're innovating more, but you're unstable because things are always changing and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's always these sort of kind of trade-offs that come up when you have this multiple kinds of outcomes that you can get, especially given the scale and what's this like we've been talking about with AI. And so there's huge questions about how those decisions are made. But interestingly, every single AI system, and this will shock a lot of people listening to this, every single AI system out there has these trade-offs already built into them, right? You're using ChatGPT, right? It has trade-offs built into it. You're using Claude or wherever else, it has trade-offs. You're using more traditional AI tools, they have trade-offs already built into them. And so the question is, already, these things are there. And the question is, who decides the balance between whether it should be faster or more visible or more automated or more judgment? That is, for a lot of people, abstracted from them right now.
I think that for me is one of the scariest things, because when it comes down to it, there's probably less than like 100 people that have the influence in building these things that we're all using. And they're the ones that are making decisions for so many people, and we are giving them the power to make those decisions. And that's something that I really don't think we think about at all. And especially as AI scales up, there's only really going to be like so many big companies, and we are going to be giving all of our agency, all of our everything basically to these companies. And I don't know a time in the world where we gave a few people lots of power and it went really well.
No, no, I don't know a time, unfortunately, I'm not a historian, but nothing jumps out where there's been so much power concentrated and, a great outcome. But I think that it doesn't have to be that way, right? Part of the reason why we try to have more and more of these kinds of conversations is actually to talk about it a bit more, because a lot of people think that that's just a tech thing and the tech guys will sort it out, right? But actually, a lot of what we're talking about here is actually leadership. It's actually about,
100%.
The fact that decisions have to be made. It's not just about AI capability. It's really about, of that would continue to advance. It will continue to advance.
Yeah.
The more difficult question is, for leaders and for leadership, do we have leadership systems, right? Leadership systems that are advancing at a similar sort of pace to
Oh
what the AI is doing.
gosh,
Right? Right.
that point comes back to the amplification, right? Because even for ever how long we've had companies, yeah, someone is good at their job, so they get promoted. They're good at that job, they get promoted more. They're not necessarily always promoted because they're good leaders, right? They're promoted because they're good at getting a certain outcome like profitability or sales. And that's probably actually what scares me the most, is just because how this goes is down to humans and their leadership and their egos, right? The reason it's going to go faster and faster is because humans feel nervous that this person is going faster than me, so they're going to go faster. Like, it's like that race to nuclear war. Like, it's a really similar thing, and that's what scares me the most, is that this is it's more of a leadership question than it is even a technology capability question. And humans fail that leadership question so much we fail it.
Absolutely. And I think it's never been a bigger leadership question, to be honest. And some of the basic things, like as AI capabilities accelerate, expand, get faster, scaled, embedded into organizations, into society, and let's not forget, right? It's not all about the commercial side of things. It's also about society, what happens within our communities, what's allowed within, various jurisdictions, etc. Right? The question will actually start to surface now will be around: can leaders still maintain trust? Can we align?
Maintain trust? When
Right, right,
since when did they
right.
have trust? I feel like that's been gone for a little while.
Right. But to even think about the level that we are, less for rightly or wrongly, become accustomed to with all of this scaling, does that start to degrade even, right?
100%.
Where, we don't
100%.
actually know. And I think we're starting to see some of that. How do we align stakeholders? How do we measure so-called value, right? How do we measure that? How do we know how much positive value we're getting as opposed to negative value we're destroying? How can we explain the decisions that we're seeing happening, right? And those kinds of things. And we also have to think about, within organizations, if you were able to do any of all those things, could you do it without completely slowing everything down and literally stopping everything? And then you think, what was the point of AI in the first place? Right?
Yeah.
Right? And so it's a difficult one, right? It's a very difficult conversation for a lot of organizations and leaders that I speak to. What they're seeing is that they need to invest a lot more in this space of leadership. Let's call it leadership systems of kinds that almost have to innovate and think through how do we align all of this stuff whilst all of this scaling is happening. Because what I've been seeing, to be honest, you get different kinds of tech, of course, you get different kinds of organizations, leaders of all kinds, but the same things carry on, it's just over and over, same problems of weakening trust, like when we're talking about alignment, sort of start breaks down, parts of the organization just don't talk to each other, and all of that gets amplified now. But look, Tolu, I mean, we've had such an interesting conversation, haven't we? I mean, we've gone through everything from, how people, think about AI in a completely different way from what I think we need to be thinking about, to what the future almost looks like, haven't we? I think it's incredible. But I think there's so much more to talk about. But unfortunately,
You're gonna have to have me back on.
Yeah, time is not our friend, is it? So I think we have to do this again at some point. But it's been incredible. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and to everyone for watching. Of course, if you enjoy this, do subscribe and like and comment and let us know how you feel. And yes, until the next time, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, everyone.